September 1944. A train pulls into a dusty station 6 miles north of Medford, Oregon. Sergeant Joseph Weber steps out, bracing for the worst. But as he looks at the towering pines and the rushing Rogue River, his breath catches. It's a mirror image of the Black Forest he left years ago. No firing squads, no starvation. Just a terrifying realization. He was an enemy of the state, but he had just arrived in paradise. Weber was 22 years old. Captured near Tunis in May of 1943, he had spent 6 weeks convinced the British would execute him. Instead, the Americans fed him 3 meals a day on the Liberty ship that carried him across the Atlantic. Beef, bread, vegetables, more food than he had seen in 2 years of fighting in North Africa. When the ship docked at Norfolk, Virginia, guards loaded him onto a Pullman train car with padded seats and clean windows. The other prisoners whispered that this had to be propaganda, a trick. They would arrive at a camp and the real treatment would begin. Now Weber looked at the Oregon landscape and tried to understand what he was seeing. He thought about the last letter from his mother in Stuttgart. She had written about rationing, about air raids, about neighbors who stopped speaking after their sons died on the Eastern Front. The letter was 4 months old when it reached him. She had no idea where he was. The Red Cross would tell her eventually, prisoner of war, Camp White, Oregon, still alive. And in that moment, standing in the Oregon sun, Weber realized something that would change his life forever. This wasn't temporary. This wasn't propaganda. This was real. And it was better than anything Germany had offered him as a citizen. Camp White spread across the agate desert like a small city. 1,300 buildings. More than 40,000 American soldiers had trained here since 1942, learning to fight in terrain that resembled France and Germany. By late 1944, 1,600 German prisoners occupied a separate compound on the northeastern edge. Weber and 83 other new arrivals walked through the main gate at 11:47. An American sergeant with a clipboard directed them toward their barracks. No shouting, no rifles pointed at their backs, just directions. The barracks were wooden structures with tar paper roofs. Inside, each man received a bunk with a mattress, 2 wool blankets, and a pillow. Weber had been sleeping on sand in Tunisia for 8 months before his capture. He sat on the bunk and pressed his hand against the mattress. It did not move. Before we continue this remarkable story, if you're enjoying this, hit that like button and subscribe to the channel. And drop a comment below telling us where you're watching from. We love hearing from history enthusiasts around the world. Corporal Werner Engel took the bunk above him. Engel was 24, from a farm near Munich. He had fought in Poland and France before Africa. He looked at the barracks, at the mattresses, at the other prisoners unpacking their few possessions. "This cannot be real," he said. At 12:30, guards escorted the new prisoners to the mess hall. Weber walked through the door and smelled food cooking. Real food. Not the thin soup that had been standard rations for the last year. Not the hard bread that crumbled into dust. Actual cooking. The prisoners formed a line. American cooks served each man from large pots. Weber received a metal tray divided into sections. Roast beef, mashed potatoes, green beans, a slice of bread with butter, a cup of coffee. He carried the tray to a wooden table and sat down. Around him, other German prisoners sat in silence, staring at their food. Nobody ate. Weber looked at the portion of meat on his tray, more meat than he had eaten in a single meal since 1942. In North Africa, the Africa Corps had received reduced rations for months. Supply lines from Italy were broken by Allied air attacks. Soldiers learned to eat every 2 days instead of every day. When the British and Americans surrounded them in Tunisia, some units went 3 days without food. Engel leaned across the table. "The Americans are trying to make us fat before they shoot us." Weber picked up his fork. "If they are going to shoot us, I will die with a full stomach." He ate everything on his tray. The meat was tender, the potatoes were hot, the bread was soft. When he finished, he looked around the mess hall. Other prisoners were eating now. Some were crying. Weber did not cry. He sat at the table and tried to understand what was happening. That afternoon, an American captain addressed the new prisoners in careful German. He explained the rules. Prisoners would work 6 days per week. Pay was 80 cents per day. Money could be used at the camp canteen to buy cigarettes, soap, writing paper, magazines. Prisoners could write letters home. Free postage. The Red Cross would deliver them to Germany. Mail would arrive when possible. Current delivery time, approximately 4 months. Prisoners could subscribe to newspapers, recreation time after work, sports equipment available, books in the camp library, night classes in English and American history for those interested. Prisoners would be treated according to the Geneva Convention. Food rations identical to American soldier rations. Medical care identical to American soldier care. Any prisoner caught attempting escape would be returned and placed in solitary confinement for 14 days. Second attempt, 30 days. The captain asked if there were questions. Weber raised his hand. "Is this real?" The captain looked at him. "This is Camp White. You are prisoners of war. You will be treated as the Geneva Convention requires. When the war ends, you will go home. That is real." Weber lowered his hand. The next morning at 7:30, guards loaded Weber and 35 other prisoners onto a truck. The truck drove south through the Rogue Valley toward orchards near Medford. Weber sat in the back and watched Oregon pass by. Farms, barns, cattle grazing in green fields, houses with intact roofs and glass, and everything looked clean, untouched. No bomb craters, no burned buildings, no refugees walking beside the road with everything they owned tied to their backs. The truck stopped at a pear orchard owned by Raymond Fisher. Fisher was 54, second-generation German-American, spoke German better than English. Pick the pears carefully. Do not bruise the fruit. Fill the wooden boxes. Stack them by the road. A good worker can fill 36 boxes per day. Meet that quota, and you can return to camp early. One guard remained. He sat under a tree and read a newspaper. Fisher looked at him. "Where would you go?" Fisher continued, "You are in Oregon. Canada is 800 miles north. Mexico is 1,200 miles south. You have no money, no car, no civilian clothes. You try to escape, someone calls the sheriff before you walk 5 miles. That evening, Fisher sent 6 apple pies to the camp. The guards distributed slices to the prisoners who had worked in his orchard. Weber ate his slice slowly. He had not tasted pie since before the war. Later in the barracks, after lights out, Engel spoke into the darkness. Weber did not answer. He was thinking about the green mountains and the clean barracks and the apple pie, about the farmer who spoke German and offered jobs after the war, about his mother's letter describing rationing and air raids. This was not war. This was something else. He looked at the photographs of American automobile factories and began to understand why Germany had lost in Africa and would lose in Europe. In January 1945, Camp White received new prisoners from France, captured during the Battle of the Bulge. They were harder, more committed to Nazi ideology. They did not believe the stories about good treatment and plentiful food. They arrived expecting brutality and received roast beef. The confusion made them angry. Weber watched one prisoner throw his dinner tray against the mess hall wall, shouting that accepting enemy food was betrayal and weakness. 3 guards removed him from the mess hall. The next morning he was at work in the potato fields with everyone else. By February, even the new prisoners stopped complaining about the food. Some began attending English classes. A few asked about the re-education program. Weber had attended these classes since December. The Americans did not call it re-education. They called it information. They showed films about the Constitution, elections, freedom of the press. They explained that newspapers could criticize the government without punishment or closure. The prisoners did not believe this. They thought it was propaganda. The teachers brought American newspapers with opposing political opinions. Then local Oregon citizens explained how they had voted and openly criticized President Roosevelt. Nothing happened to them. The prisoners sat silently, trying to understand this. On May 8, 1945, loudspeakers announced Germany's surrender. Guards gathered all prisoners in the yard. The commander read the announcement. A translator repeated it in German. The Third Reich no longer existed. Hitler was dead. The war in Europe was finished. The prisoners stood quietly. No one cried. No one protested. The commander had expected grief or violence. Instead, the men returned calmly to their barracks. That night, Engels stared at the wall. "We lost," Weber agreed. Engels spoke of his dead father and brother. "For nothing." Weber thought about Stuttgart, the bombing, his mother, and the print shop that no longer existed. He also thought about Oregon and Fisher's farm. Engels said he wanted to stay. Weber understood, but immigration law made it impossible. All prisoners would be sent home to rebuild Germany. Fisher pushed an envelope through the wire mesh. "Money for when you get back to Germany. Start your life again." Weber tried to refuse, but Fisher insisted. "You worked hard. You earned this." Inside was $50, more than Weber had earned in 6 months at camp. Fisher spoke quietly through the mesh. "If you come back to Oregon after things settle down, I have a job for you. I will sponsor your immigration. America needs men who work hard and are honest." Weber could not trust himself to speak. He only nodded. Fisher nodded back and left. The next morning at 6 O'Reeks, Weber and 97 other prisoners boarded trucks bound for Seattle. As they pulled away from Camp White, Weber looked back at the barracks, mess hall, library, and the American flag over the gate. Engels sat beside him and asked if Fisher had visited. "He offered me a job after the war," Weber said. "Me too," Engels replied. They spoke of Germany, of family, and of Oregon. Neither finished their sentences. They both understood what Oregon represented: green mountains, clean farms, fair work, and the possibility of beginning again. But orders were orders. They were going back. The ship to Europe was already waiting. Weber returned to Stuttgart in January 1946. The city was worse than his mother's letters had described. Neighborhoods lay in ruins. Food was scarce. People lived in basements and shattered buildings. Weber found his mother in 3 rooms of a damaged apartment. His father had been killed when a munitions factory was bombed in March 1945. Weber gave her Fisher's $50. She cried at the sight of American money. It would keep them alive for months. Weber found work at a printing company restarting operations. Germany rebuilt slowly under American occupation. Democratic reforms, new parties, elections. Weber attended meetings explaining these ideas. They sounded familiar. He had heard them before, in quiet classrooms at Camp White, far from home. By 1948, Weber was managing the printing company. The owner had died and left the business to him. Weber married a woman from Stuttgart who had survived the war working in a hospital. They had 2 daughters and built a life in the new Germany, rising from ruins. But he never forgot Oregon, never forgot the Green Mountains, or the farmer who had offered him a second chance. In 1952, Weber received a letter from America. Fisher had kept his address. The letter said the job offer still stood, and immigration was now possible. Weber showed the letter to his wife. She read it twice. Germany was better now. They had a stable life. But Oregon sounded like paradise. She suggested he visit first. If it was as he remembered, they would decide together. Weber agreed and traveled in summer 1953. Fisher met him at the Portland airport and drove him south through the valleys to Medford. The Green Mountains were exactly as Weber remembered. The farm had expanded. The concrete garage was still standing, solid after 8 years. Fisher showed him the orchards and explained the business. Weber spent 2 weeks working on the farm. The labor was the same. The sun was the same. Fisher's wife baked the same apple pie. Everything felt unchanged, Except the barbed wire and guard towers were gone. Weber could come and go freely. The freedom felt overwhelming. Before Weber left, Fisher made a final offer. Bring your family, work 2 years, buy land, build a business, become an American citizen. Give your daughters opportunities Germany could not. Weber returned to Stuttgart and discussed it with his wife. They decided in September 1953 they would immigrate to Oregon. Weber sold the printing company and used the money for passage. In February 1954, they arrived in Oregon. Fisher met them at the airport and drove them to a small house on his property where Weber would work, save, and begin again. Weber's daughters were 5 and 3. They spoke no English. Within 6 months, they spoke it better than their parents. Within a year, they sounded completely American. Weber worked for Fisher 3 years instead of 2, saving money carefully. In 1957, he bought 30 acres of pear orchard near Medford. He built a house, planted more trees, and started his own fruit business. His daughters attended American schools, married American men, and raised American children. In 1961, Weber became a naturalized citizen. In a Medford courthouse, he swore allegiance to the United States before a judge who had fought in France. After the ceremony, the judge shook his hand. "Welcome home." Weber tried to explain he had been a German soldier. The judge nodded. He knew Weber's history: prisoner, farm worker, return immigrant. "That makes you American," he said simply, and meant it. Weber lived in Oregon until his death in 1998. His orchard stayed profitable for decades. He never returned to Germany. His wife visited once to see family, but Weber stayed behind. He said Germany was the past. Oregon was the future he had chosen. His daughters once asked why he returned to America instead of staying where he was born. Weber thought a long time. Then he told them about Tunisia and surrender, about expecting execution and receiving roast beef, about Green Mountains and a farmer who offered work to enemies. He told them about apple pie, newspapers, and night classes in democracy, about Americans treating prisoners better than Germany treated its citizens, about arriving at Camp White at 22 and thinking he had reached heaven, about learning democracy by watching it function, not hearing it preached. He told them America had the power to be cruel and chose not to be. It fed its enemies, paid them, and prepared them for life after war. That choice, more than victory or defeat, explained why he came back and why he stayed. He told them about standing in Fisher's orchard in 1945 and understanding for the first time what it meant to live in a place where government existed to serve people instead of people existing to serve government. He told them that Oregon was not heaven. It was better than heaven. Heaven was something you reached after death. Oregon was something you could build while still alive. The pear orchard Weber built is still operating today under the management of his grandson. The concrete garage he built on Fisher's farm in 1944 is still standing, exactly as Fisher predicted. If Weber had returned to Germany in 1946 and stayed there, none of this would exist. But he came back to Oregon. He chose the Green Mountains and the opportunities and the freedom and the life that America offered to a former enemy soldier who had learned what democracy meant by living under it as a prisoner. He chose the country that had treated him better as an enemy than his own country had treated him as a citizen. That choice made all the difference.